Trauma. It is an interesting concept, a word that is loosely tossed around sometimes. What exactly is trauma? Because one have to think, is this event that happened in my life or your life trauma? Uh, how do you define it? How do you characterize it? How do you explain it? Because in order to find solutions to a thing, you have to be able to name it. You have to be able to explore it. What are the symptoms, for example, of trauma? Are there different categories? Uh, some people, and I might be one of those people who prescribe to this, is basically trauma is pain. You are in pain, and sometimes that pain can be debilitating. Our goal is to no longer be helpless or hopeless. Our goal is to go about the business of changing our lives. Listen, this is About This Life podcast with your host, Anne Marie. I am so pleased to have with me today my guest. Hello, Avery.
Hello,
How are
love.
you?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
doing wonderful. I'm so excited to be here. And we're talking about stress and trauma and all the things, which is just, I'm the super nerd. I love all that stuff.
Well, I'm glad you love all that stuff because we are going to get into it. So, Avery, you're someone who helped people navigate chaos. Avery, honey, our lives are filled with chaos, whether
Right?
it is internal, whether it is societal, whether it's in our relationships and how relate to other people. So a lot of people are walking around, and they say trauma, but what exactly is trauma, Avery?
Yes. So when we look at that word trauma, when we look at it from the medical perspective, it actually means injury. So you can have knee trauma, brain trauma. You can also have psychological trauma. And that's typically what we use to describe when we say trauma, but it actually is an injury to your nervous system. And so this means that it goes beyond something that's incredibly distressing. And absolutely, we still need the support to get through those distressing events. But trauma means that your nervous system is actually injured and it's going to respond in unexpected ways to normal scenarios. And so the importance of that is that a lot of these strategies that we talk about a lot to help navigate chaos, the meditation, the mindfulness, the deep breathing, all of that can actually be very harmful and counterproductive in cases of nervous system injury levels of
You're
trauma.
kidding me. So, first of all, how does meditation be counterproductive? Wait, let's back up. Let's back up.
All right.
Because because you said a lot in like 1 minute. Okay, so let's back up a moment because one would think, often thinks of trauma as something emotional, something mental, something that we go through inside our head. But you just listed trauma as injury to the nervous system, and you provided some examples physically. So make that mind, body, nervous system connection for us. How does all of that relate?
Yeah, and really it comes down to just the definition of trauma just means injury. So emergency rooms are also known as trauma rooms, trauma centers, and it's all for dealing with some kind of injury. And so when we have that connection between our mind and our emotions, and we experience something that does break our nervous system, that's where now we have something that needs to be held, something that needs to be given space to heal in order for that piece of our nervous system to no longer be affected by that traumatic event. And the problem is, like we were talking about before,
Mhm.
the world is so chaotic. There are so many things that are going to keep aggravating that injury until we take some time to actually heal it.
Okay, so if a person has cancer, is that trauma?
It could be considered trauma to their cells on a very technical level, but generally, no. So generally, trauma is something more that happens externally quickly and creates that break of
So a
sorts.
sexual assault might be considered because that event might be considered trauma. Sexual assault.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Okay.
most often it is. And this is also where it's really interesting. Different scenarios experienced by different people. Some of them will find it traumatic and will actually experience that break in their nervous system. Other people won't. And it all is just really into how we're wired, how we were taught growing up, and the beliefs that we have about that situation, how we assign meaning, whether or not we were dissociated from our emotions or not. There are so many different factors. So even in the same scenario, three people
Mhm.
witnessing that, one may be traumatized and the other one may not be. And that's such an important piece of the discussion.
So when we take a look at, you use the word witnessing, it's almost as though you have somebody who might experience trauma, for example, armed robbery or, something of that sort. And then there's witnesses, that's secondary trauma. It, am I on the right path?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also where we can experience something that's known as complex trauma. And so when we, as maybe highly sensitive people moving through the world that we're in right now, which is kind of a dumpster fire, we can become those feelings of unsafe because of what we're seeing through this media that we're constantly being bombarded by. When we grow up, and it's not necessarily any thing that you would say injured you, but over time, that feeling of not feeling safe, not feeling okay to be yourself, not being accepted for who you are, that can also create the complex trauma piece. So, really, like we could talk for hours about all the nuances of trauma and what counts and
Yes.
what doesn't. But truly, the most important piece is that if you have experienced something distressing to you, whether it counts as trauma or not, you deserve help. You deserve some time and space and support to be able to heal that,
Mhm.
whether or not it counts as trauma through a definition or not. So I
Through a
think that's just really
definition or
important.
not, so it's words. But one of the most important things that you've said, and you've said it more than once, was the relationship of the nervous system. So, what does the nervous system do? Other than we hear people say, well, oh, you get on my nerves.
Yes.
We're talking about you get on my last nerve. Okay, what do we mean when we're talking about our nervous system? What is the function of our nervous system, which is related to our brain function?
Yes, great question. So truly, we have two big sides of our nervous system. We've got the autonomic, which is the one that happens automatically, like breathing and our heartbeat and all those things, which, like, goodness, could you imagine if you had to think about that? And then there's the voluntary system, which is obviously stuff that we can choose from. And like moving and talking and all of those things fall into that system. But really, when we're talking about the injury to the nervous system, it happens on the autonomic side. And so our stress response is really our body's default response to chaos. It's what when we see something dangerous or experience something that makes us feel unsafe, our body kicks into fight, flight, or freeze or fawn, which are now other methods of our stress response that trauma has really taught us how to use. But really, this side, the stress switch, is where our body can either break that switch so that it doesn't work normally or it fritzes, or maybe that switch is always on. And that's often what we see in complex trauma. There's this hypervigilance of us looking for pieces that are unsafe and making sure that we're calming everybody as much as possible. We don't deal with somebody being angry because that now shatters our safety. So, really, the nervous system is that part of us that creates that internal feeling of safety. And when it feels like that's at risk, that's when our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, sympathetic, it activates to be able to try and get us to a space of safety. And so
So
again, our
it's
default response to chaos
protection.
is to turn that on. Yeah, exactly. But we can choose a different response. And that's where learning to regulate that really comes in. I interrupted you, so you go ahead.
No, I interrupted you, and so I appreciate the knowledge that you are bringing here. So you mentioned there are two halves, and so trauma is really impacting the autonomic side of things, and I think that's important. How do you separate trauma from something like OCD or PTSD? And you mentioned in terms of transparency, you mentioned that in your bio. These are just
Mhm.
things that okay, you've dealt with, you've managed, you figured out a solution. So what's these? What's OCD? What's PTSD?
Yes, absolutely. So I have all of those things in a nice little bow bundle, and OCD is when our brain really focuses in on possibilities of things to the point that you cannot let it go and you feel incredibly unsafe. And so it's this way that my brain is wired, and other people with OCD are like this as well. There's so many different subtypes of it. It's not just I need to clean my hands and lock the door 3 times. There's a lot of different ways that OCD has shown up for me. And a lot of it is I have to learn to sit with that fear and anxiety and realize that the unsafety that I'm feeling is okay to sit with. I don't have to fix it or get rid of it because that's where the compulsive part of the obsessive compulsive disorder comes in. And really, it's truly an anxiety disorder. So it goes right hand in hand with my generalized anxiety disorder,
Okay.
which helps think about all the possible ways that things can go sideways. And instead of me just being like, oh, that could happen, I'm like, oh, that could happen. So I need to do this and this and this. And then what if this happens? And okay, I've got this plan for this. And with the way that our world is right now, uh, the plans that I have,
Mm,
girl, there's like lists on lists
girl,
and lists,
girl.
right? Right? Like, oh, it could be a mess. So learning how to work with that rather than have it drive the bus all the time is really important.
I think it's interesting because, we're defining all these terms to help our audience, but then we don't want to go to the other extreme and make people think that, oh, I have this or I'm crazy. But there's a tension, there's a difference between being OCD or being anxious and the person who likes to be prepared, for
Absolutely.
the different types of circumstances and possibilities that can happen. So is that person crazy or chaotic, or is that just a person who thinks of different scenarios and likes to be prepared in a moment?
Yes, for me and for a lot of the people that I've talked to and worked with that also have OCD, the big difference for us is that we're prepared because literally feel like if we're not, we're going to die. If I
Mm,
do not have my desk organized in this particular space, I feel the sense of impending doom. Like I actually feel like something terrible will happen because this is not in that space. And logically, I
mm.
know that is not the case, but emotionally and from the anxiety level, the nervous system level, I struggle to unhook from that. And so part of the journey of learning how to live with something like this is not to get rid of it, because that's not possible for a lot of our struggles, especially for our mental
Mhm.
struggles. But it's learning how to pick it up and be like, okay, OCD, I see you today, but we're going to try to just work together rather than have you overrun my life and take everything away from me for today. So
When
it's kind of
when
that
did you,
balance.
Avery, when did you know? When did you figure out that all these things were impacting you? When did you know? Did someone tell you? Did someone diagnose you? Or did you know there's something different about me and you wanted somebody to share and have some input? When did you know?
So the thing is, looking back, because hindsight's a jerk, I can see it now that, like, oh yeah, there was a lot of hindsight warnings that I should have noticed way back when. But it actually only happened after I had been working as a registered nurse in ICUs for about a decade. And I all of a sudden overnight got incredibly ill. And that led to multiple chronic illnesses and a disability and a huge change of identity for me because I was no longer able to be an ICU nurse. And that's really what I saw my calling as. But as this was all shifting around me, all of a sudden, all of the areas where I was able to control my anxiety, like in the highly regulated space of an ICU nurse, that was no longer there. So much of my chaos that I had learned to sit on and control was no longer able for me to control that. So I think it was sort of in that a couple of years after that big change for me, uh, the anxiety started to get really strong. And then I started to have some of these intrusive thoughts that were incredibly wild, incredibly disturbing, and leading to some pretty wacky dreams. And so I was speaking to my physician about it, and he was like, that really sounds like OCD. And I was like, nah, that can't be
Mm.
OCD. I don't have OCD. That shows up before you're 37 and going through this conversation. And it was really only this past year where I had been diagnosed by two separate psychiatrists saying that I had OCD. And to get two psychiatrists to agree on something like that is sometimes a bit of a unicorn. So it was a
Okay.
really, should have been a good thing. But and still, I was like, oh, like, I don't think it is. I don't think it is. But the first time I did a therapy treatment called ERP, which is exposure response prevention for OCD, which is the gold standard treatment for that, that's when it landed. Because before I was just like, no, like I'm just too, I'm a high achiever. I can just do all these things. It's just that's how it feels in my body. This is just what I how I operate. And then in that moment, in that therapy session, I was just like, oh shoot.
Okay.
Yeah, this
What's
isn't
this
good.
change of identity? What exactly changed for you?
Yeah, so I again was working as an ICU nurse. I was working these 12-hour shifts and I was working more than full time because that's kind of the way that our healthcare system is, and I'm sure it's the same in the US.
And I know well because my mom was a registered nurse. God bless her soul. But
There
yes, I
you go.
understand.
Yeah, that's it. Like, there's no such thing as just working full time, really. And so I was working quite a bit, and then all of a sudden, it was Christmas morning. I came off the night shift, and the charge nurse looked me in the eye, the head nurse, and she was like, "Oh, you don't look well. Like, go home. I'm going to mark you down as sick for your next shift. Feel better." And so I went home and slept for 20 hours, and then I slept for 20 hours the
Mm.
next day, and the day after that, and it just led to this time where I was fighting different concerns and different health issues, and there was so much that popped up at once, and there was a lot of scary ideas being thrown out there. And then finally, about 18 months later, I was given my first chronic health diagnosis, and that came with this, it felt like a heavy gate just closed, like an iron gate locked closed in front of me, because it was very clear that being an ICU nurse, something that gave me so much focus and so much identity and meaning and purpose to my life, was no longer available and would never be available again. And so I saw myself as that person growing in that space. And even though I had started to grow my business to really help people with stress, as I could see the impact of chronic stress on their body in the ICU, I still wanted to make that decision for myself, but instead my body made it for me. And so I came to this point where I realized there was no middle ground anymore. I couldn't reconcile the life that I saw myself living with what was actually possible now. And so I was talking with my partner one night and I was like, I think I need to change my name. Like, I think I need
Mm.
a full,
Really?
fresh start here. And so I spent 37 years of my life as Heather. And then at Thanksgiving dinner, I told my family that I was changing my name and I was
But why a
becoming
name
Avery.
change? And all of these things are occurring. Why a name change? And
Yeah, it really came down to that I didn't feel like Heather anymore because I knew the life that Heather was going to live. And I knew what Heather was capable of. And it felt like that compromise of trying to find, the middle ground, because everything literally changed for me overnight. I didn't have time to adjust. It was just like a switch flipped and all of that was no longer possible. And so I really tried for a long time to find, how do I move forward with a compromise? And then I just realized it's not healthy for me to keep searching for the compromise because I keep pushing myself
mm,
into something that is not possible.
you're trying
So
to fit
I,
yourself in a box.
exactly. So I had to grieve the loss of that box. I had to grieve the loss of Heather and let that life go.
But
And
Avery,
it was
not
so
every, a
powerful.
lot of people grieve, we grieve parts of us, but you changed your name.
I
Not
did,
everybody go
yeah.
ahead and change their names.
No, no,
That's
it's not going to be the right fit.
interesting. That's like an extra step. And I say it's an extra step in the sense that, okay, I was once that person, now I'm evolved into somebody else. And they go on in terms of that journey, but they keep their name. And
Hmm.
naming is such that's your identity, what you're called and what you're known by. So
Hmm.
did that did that create more chaos, or did that settle you? Did that calm you to the place that you need to be? Are you happy being Avery? Talk about
Oh
it.
man. Yeah,
Do
let's
you
talk about it.
like
So,
Avery?
the thought of changing my name, when I was saying this to my partner, he was just like, "Really? Like, your whole business is Heather Thatcher. Like, everything is branded that. Everyone knows you as Heather. All of our families know you as this. It's going to be hard." And I was like, "Yeah." So the fear of the process for sure got to me. But the first time that he called me Avery, it was like something settled into place in my body. And I was
Okay.
like, here we go. And I think absolutely a lot of us evolve. And before this point, I had done a lot of healing and growth and worked through some of my traumas and things, but it was all happening gradually and all in like a space where I could witness it happening. Whereas
Hmm.
for me, this just felt too much like, uh, it's not that I was turning a new chapter, it's that I was no longer in a book. I was on something completely different. And so for me, it made sense to change my name. And even though it was really hard and I was shaking like a leaf, let me tell you, when I told my parents and when I told my in-laws, uh, but the feeling that I felt when I knew that I wasn't trying to live or go back to the life of Heather, I was now able to carve a new path and create a new way forward for me. It changed everything. The acceptance of the diagnoses, the health, the disability, all of the things, it just changed everything.
That is such an interesting perspective, and thank you for sharing that part of you in terms of identity and who you are. Heather, I'm about to call you Heather now.
Yeah, that's
Avery.
all right. All right.
I just slip of the tongue. Okay, so Avery, especially given your background, your training as a nurse and being in ICU and all of that, there's a school of thought that a lot of people prescribe to, and I happen to agree with them, to be honest with you, in terms of there's trauma or trauma-like events or secondary trauma, complex trauma, whatever we want to call it, or even the situations when it's not classified as trauma, it's stored
Hmm.
in our body. Now, we heard you talk about the nervous system, but the link between what's happened to us, what's happening inside of us, and being absorbed on us on a cellular level. Break that down for us so our audience can understand that, because somebody might not understand, okay, maybe I was in a car accident and I know I have bruises and I've healed for that, but what do you mean it's stored in my body? What do you
Yeah.
mean by that? Can you help us to understand that concept?
Absolutely. And there's a ton of research, like peer-reviewed scientific research that backs this up. And of course, there's always the debate. And I think that's so healthy. It's nice to have both sides with their thoughts and their research.
Yeah.
But when we look at especially polyvagal theory, which is kind of this main guiding arm of nervous system research, it shows that our body does store the trauma in our responses to things, and also, again, from that autonomic nervous system of how it responds. But then, even down on the cellular level, it changes as well. So, there was this group, they did a study on a group of mothers of children with diverse needs, special needs, children with autism, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it's very overwhelming for those mothers. They were dealing with a lot of stigma and just judgment from other people, and then also navigating the healthcare system with this and all of those pressures and things. And so they brought everybody into a group. There was no focused topics, it was just discussion. And before the discussion group started, they tested everyone's DNA. And so our DNA strands like circle up, twisting around each other. And at the very top, there's these little hats. They're called telomeres. And those cap off our DNA to keep it solid. But over time, stress wears away at those telomeres and our DNA starts
Mm,
to unravel. And so that's what starts to cause our stress is eating away at our DNA and changing it so that we were more susceptible to things like cancer and heart disease and strokes and things. And so what they saw was that just even with this not super guided focus group sessions, just these people sharing and feeling heard and understood, at the end of 8 weeks, their DNA had re-raveled and the telomeres had reformed.
right,
So,
right.
right.
So therapy then. Okay, so there are people who, is it Reiki? They do Reiki, and there's so multitude of therapies out there, and some work and some don't. How, where have you found a solution in terms of managing it? Because we understand we can't get rid of it. We understand that it's just like, okay, hello, friend. Here you are. Let's have a
Yeah.
conversation and let's figure out how our day is going to go. How do you manage your what word am I looking for? I don't want to call it, it's not a problem, it's not an issue. How do you manage yourself? How do you manage this diagnosis? You know? How do I
Yeah.
find words? You tell me, what word should I be using? What should we call it so that we don't offend um, and say something that's even more offensive to someone who's going through this experience? What should we call it and how do we manage it is the question.
Yes. So I think the simplest thing to call it is chaos. Because
Okay.
when I first was diagnosed, or when I was going through all the process of getting diagnosed, and then with each subsequent diagnosis, when it lands, it just feels like my world has got thrown up in the air. And it's like this chaotic falling of paper, and it just, you don't know where you're going to land yet. So I think describing things instead of stresses, stressors, those kind of things, describing it as chaos, I think
Mhm.
just makes it nice and accessible because everyone's got chaos in their life.
Yeah.
Now, when we
We're on
talk
the
about,
continuum. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. When we talk about managing, um, I feel like we've been trained with just the different systems that we live in and have grown up in, and patriarchy, capitalism, ableism. Management sounds like you are still doing what is expected of you, and you are still doing it to the best of your ability, 100% of the time, regardless of what kind of chaos you're facing. And so instead of managing it, which I think actually leads to us really experiencing even more chaos and destruction in our own lives and internally as well, we need to process it. And so sometimes this means talking to someone about it. Sometimes this means talking to someone like a therapist about it. But a lot of the
Mm.
times it means that we actually just need to sit and ask ourselves, how did that make me feel?
Hmm.
How has that changed my feelings of safety? How has that changed how I see this situation, this person, the world moving forward? How how do I make sense of what's happened, this chaos, and how do I figure out a way to carry that forward? Some people can do that through journaling. Some people need embodiment practices like somatic relief or yoga. Running for some people, I'm not a runner. That's just awful for me. So, but some people it really works for them. They find that meditative. Good for them. So really, it's just finding the ways that you can process and also name your experience of those things. It's so much more important than just trying to push through whatever you're experiencing.
So I'm hearing you say the goal is safety. That the
Always.
that the goal is, how do you make your psyche and your body return to a state where it feels safe.
Mhm.
And for some of us, we have the ability to do that some of us we don't. Uh,
I
because I
agree.
Yeah, because I think about, for example, the children in war-torn countries. If you look
Hmm.
at, Palestinians in Gaza, um, or you look at children in poverty who are hungry and
Hmm.
not getting their physical needs met. So how do we, in terms of our humanity, in terms of our um, acknowledgement that there are people who may not have the tools or the opportunity to regulate what it is that they're going through. How do we,
Beautiful question.
yeah, how do we get to
Yeah.
that place?
And so I think this is really important for us then to define safety. Because I
Mm,
think our go-to with safety is that everything is good, everything is calm, nothing is affecting us. But
mhm,
really, safety comes down to our ability to trust ourselves to take the next step. And absolutely, sometimes that next step means I am going to choose to smile and still find joy in the midst of the most horrible things. And having the privilege that I come from as a white woman, I totally understand that I'm not,
mhm,
I am speaking from that space. And also at the same time, I know that I have also witnessed things and seen things that other people wouldn't be able to dream about. And so being able to accept that right now it's like this, but here's where my agency still is. And being able to find that space of safety, that's really what we're looking for. We're not trying to calm all the chaos or make it so that nothing in our life is ever going to rock the boat, because that's not possible. Chaos is inevitable, especially in spaces like what you were
right,
describing and in the Congo and Haiti and
right.
all of the things. It's more about how do I maintain that sense of agency? Because that's where a lot of trauma happens, is where we feel like we are not in control of anything.
Yes. So it is like the operative word here is choice and choosing. And that is, I can choose joy. I can choose to smile today despite my circumstances. And in a sense, it's interesting because a lot of people, and thank you for your transparency in talking about from a racial point of view. I know in the Black community, the African American, whatever term we use, that we often say, don't look like what you've gone through. And very often we don't look like what we've gone through because we've learned how to smile. We've learned how to share that laughter with other people despite the chaos that is occurring with us. Wow, you just opened something for me, Avery,
Oh, wow.
because, and here's what you opened for me is how long, how often we've been put in a position and we do that, and that is the foundation of our resiliency.
Mhm.
That is the foundation of our resiliency, is that we're making choices that, yes, these things are being done, but we can choose, we can make a conscious choice. We're going to smile today. We're going to wish somebody a blessed day today. We're going to
Mhm.
have prayer today. So the choosing of doing something in the face of chaos, who knew that okay we were regulated, you know
Yep,
who understood. So that's an interesting perspective, a spiritual perspective, and that's the function of our spirituality as well.
I can
um
imagine. Yeah. And I
yeah.
feel like, depending on the person,
Mm-hmm.
for me personally, I'm not a big fan of the word resilient. Because
Mm-hmm.
to
Okay.
me, yeah, and it's fine because for some people it really
Yeah.
resonates with them. And it's just
Let's go
nuance,
there.
right?
Let's go there.
So
Cause
let's
because
go
I
there.
have,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, let's do it. So
Let's do it. Come on.
for me, resilience often is shown as this like pat on the back, oh, you were resilient, like good for you, something to cheer. And for me, resilience is more like resistance. Like
Mm.
that could have taken me down, but I said no.
Yes.
Or, that sure, I've been able to rise above this. It was not my choice to have to, but
Correct.
I did it. So I think it just depends, right? And a lot of the people that I chat with, they also struggle with the word resilience because it seems to be this like mentality of like, buck up, be resilient, you can do this. And even when you get more and more piled on you, and you're just like, resiliency sucks. Like it's heavy and it's without hope sometimes. It's just that resolve of like, okay,
Okay, this is
what's next?
continuum, this tension, and I view resilience as that place where the second thing that you said in terms of I'll get through this. Um, what did you say? Like you can handle it. You didn't choose for it to occur in your life, but you know that you can overcome it. You know you can get through it. You know you can go on the other side. And my personal struggle with resilience when people say, "Oh, you're such a resilient person." People in general, not necessarily talking about me, but people will say, "Oh, that's a resilient person." I said, well, how long?
Yes,
How much longer?
exactly.
Yeah, that's nice. That's wonderful. Yes, we're strong. Yes, you go through. How much more? Can it stop, please?
Exactly.
Can it stop,
Right?
please?
Right? And you just want to live where you're not waiting for that next bit to drop, where you're just like, okay, I gotta be resilient again. Here we go. Yes.
We have to be strong again. I'm just like, okay, we done being strong.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so that is my issue with the word resilient. It's like don't say anybody's resilient anymore because they've been going through. and they
Exactly.
and just like there's a that phrase when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you're sick and tired of being resilient, you're sick and tired of being
Exactly.
strong.
Yeah,
Okay, so that's the perspective that I come, but yet resilience being a synonym to resistance as you describe it is actually an act of social justice. It's an
I
act
agree.
that, okay, I am going to survive. So, Avery, how do we move from survival into a place where we can thrive? Because you've walked us through the brain, mental connection, the nervous system is critical to understanding all of this and how we as humans are put together. You've walked us through how different people have different means of calming themselves. So, how do we not just calm ourselves and survive? How do we move from survival mode to, okay, my life is thriving? Okay, how do we
hmm
get to that pinnacle?
So, the most important piece of this that we were not generally taught is to know the rules of the game.
Mm,
Because the way that our societies are structured, the way that capitalism is teaching us from the moment we're born to be producers, is not inherently bad. It's just how we navigate it. So, understanding patriarchy and ableism and feminism and all of these different components of our lives and racism, classism, all of these things, we need to learn the rules so that way we can learn how to navigate that game in a way that works for us rather than just have somebody be like, well, these are the rules which I've told you. So work with
yes.
those. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of it is we do have to educate ourselves and open up our perspectives to how our current belief system maybe needs to be readjusted. So that way we
Talk
can
to us
start to
about that.
work with it.
What are some give us like a concrete example of like something in our belief system that we would need to learn how to navigate so that we're taking care of ourselves.
Love it. My clearest example is when I saw myself as a high achiever and I was
Hmm.
an ICU nurse and doing all the things. I equated high achievement with being able to do more and complete more and achieve more and have a greater impact.
And
And
one
just to be able
more,
to,
and one more. High achievers equated with worth. You
yes, they do.
think
Yes, they do.
you think you're worthy. The more
Oh
you
my gosh,
achieve.
yes. And that
But
was
I
one of the big
interrupted you.
reasons.
Go ahead.
No, no, good. And it's good that you did. I'm really glad that you threw that one in there because that's actually one of the reasons why I had to change my name because I equated that high achiever with the worth of who Heather was. And so I needed to have a restart of that. And so I looked at where does high achiever come from? What are the systems that created that? Why is productivity an outcome, the thing which I'm working towards? And when you go back to even elementary school, you can see how you do this, you do the homework, you get the grade, you pass, you move on. So it's just this cycle that I've been taught into. And so what I did was redefine what high achievement actually means.
Wow.
Because
You mean you can
by
do that?
so freaking absolutely. And so I redefined it instead of achievement and worth and things. I see high achievement as my ability to create a ripple effect of compassion that spreads beyond my initial circle of influence. And so that
Say
means
that
that
again.
as a
Say that
high,
again.
yeah,
Slow down. Say that again. Let me catch that. The
I
circle
talk
of
so fast when I
influence.
get
You
excited.
said something. Come on.
Yeah. So high achievement for me means that I'm creating a ripple effect of compassion that spreads beyond my initial circle of influence. So I'm looking to make a difference to someone's life that they can then take that and make a difference to someone else. And so
Mm.
I'm not looking to be the next Oprah. I'm looking to make that person that's helping me check out all of my groceries feel important to me because they're absolutely valuable to me and to know that they make a difference and to be able to have that then ripple out again it feels like an act of resistance to this world that's so focused and so driven to just have
Hmm.
that drive in that space instead. And so that actually changed so much of how I viewed work, how I structure my day, my to-do lists. It's all centered around how is this going to create a ripple effect of compassion that spreads beyond my
Wow.
initial circle of influence?
How is it going to create a ripple effect? So if we woke up in the morning and we said instead of, we get the coffee and we say instead of going to work and say, oh, I got to go to work, it's just like, how can I make a difference in somebody's day today? Anybody who
Absolutely.
comes across my path. And that's the ripple effect.
And then I know I am a high achiever if I'm able to do that. Even just through a smile or holding the door open for someone, you don't know what that'll do and how that'll ripple effect throughout their day. So, yes, that
So you just redefined high achievement on your terms.
I did.
And
Yeah.
not what somebody told you, not for the certificate that you get because you did X, Y, and Z,
Hmm.
or the pressure of producing and outcomes, but because and that is within your circle of control. Like you can say,
Hmm.
yes, this is who I am. So you have changed your identity from the inside out.
Absolutely. And there's definitely still parts of the older version of me that like rears its head every once in a while. And I do have to name it and be like, huh, interesting.
Mhm.
Gonna figure out how to work with that part of me. But once you start going down this road of navigating things and redefining things and learning how the rules are actually not just what you were told they were, it sort of becomes this ease because you're like, oh, well, if I can redefine high achievement, what else can I redefine?
People pleasing.
Right? So there's
Yeah,
so many
that's
different
another
ways that
one.
you can dig into it. Totally. And so it just allows
Overwhelm.
that space. Exactly. Overwhelm is really great information. And
Yes,
just like overwhelm, jealousy, they all tell you something that you want that you don't have. And that's just it. It's just information.
you
So
want
you go for it.
they're all data or
It's just
data.
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 Yeah.
It's just data because a lot of these emotional things manifest because there's something lacking. There's something that's
Mhm.
not there. So it comes from a scarcity mindset. Something is scarce. Something that the mind or body needs is not being provided, which ties back to safety. And so
Absolutely.
and so the body has compensated by doing that. I'm a high achiever because maybe you want to get mom and dad's attention and they notice
Exactly.
those things, or
Hmm.
they reward you for those things.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Well, this has been an interesting conversation. I love it. I love
I
it.
agree, Anne Marie. This has been awesome.
This has been an interesting conversation so much so, and I want to give a shout out because I actually completed a course, and Meredith McNerney, she's a consultant as well, and she has something called the Calmer Network, and she has all of these instructional courses that someone can do online and find out in more detail what it's like in terms of the brain and dopamine and the dopamine factor, and more so more resources and so on and so forth. What I appreciate about you, Avery, is you're able to bring in the knowledge of the body and the understanding of that, as well as the situations and the chaos that occurs for people, and that in that way then we can move to thriving by regulating who we are and impacting other people, right?
Hmm. Absolutely.
So, in terms of closing out, I want to ask you a question. So, I would like you, if you would, to answer this, and I'll ask you maybe two, maybe three times. Uh, I used to believe, but now I believe. How would you fill in those blanks? I used to believe, but now I believe.
I used to believe that my emotional responses to things were unwelcome and made other people uncomfortable, so therefore I should stop. But now I believe that those emotional responses I have to things helps me connect more to people. And that is really where the magic is. And that's what I really feel we're missing. So I would tell my older self, keep feeling the emotions, keep feeling that.
Keep feeling the emotions. If I throw out a word to you, um, let me throw out a word. Let me think of the word. If I, what does the word make you think of? Um, pressure, pressure.
Pressure. So pressure before would have felt like something I needed to overcome and conquer. And now pressure feels like something I need to soothe. So when I feel pressure, it's a sign that I am ignoring some of my own needs, that I am asking too much of myself, and that I need to make sure that I am getting the help I need and that I need to prioritize things. So when I feel pressure now, it doesn't feel like this failure or this thing that I have to push through to figure out. Again, it's data where I can take that and be like, okay, we need to find a balance here. I need to soothe this pressure.
Okay, I have another word for you. Control, control.
Control. I love this
Ooh.
because it is a rough one for me. And with the OCD and the anxiety, for sure, control is a big thing. High achievers, for sure, also a big thing. And so I think with control, what I'm working towards and what the constant battle for me is to see control as my ability to ride the wave. So I am able to hang on or not to that little surfboard, or maybe just go with it and just, I am in control of how I ride that wave. I
Okay.
cannot control the wave, but I can control how I ride that wave.
And the last one, worth. WORTH, worth.
I like this one as well because I think so much of our worth, again, is tied up in the rules of the game that we're taught. And so, worth, I feel like, is a word that we kind of need to let go of. Because we can say, I am worthy until we're blue in the face. But if we don't actually have that brain emotional connection, we just dismiss it. So I think shifting worth to just being like, I am who I am, and I make a difference to myself, to the people which I interact with, and just seeing that rather than defining it as I am worthy, I'm valuable, because those all again come into some of those rules that we were not necessarily taught. So yes,
Yeah,
I think worth I would want to get rid of.
absolutely, absolutely. As we close out, I'm curious in terms of your business because you mentioned that a few times. So you want to go ahead and shout out your business? What do you do, Avery, for your
Yeah, thanks for
business?
asking. Thanks for asking. So I mainly help highly sensitive high achievers navigate chaos. And so we have that through our app. It's called Creating Calm. And let's be real, not many people have like a solid 30 minutes of self-care time per day or even like a 90-minute yoga class time. I mean, who's got that? So this gives you 60-second guided meditations, 15-second somatic release exercises, 15-minute yoga classes, these little things which you can do in the pockets of time to really help navigate some of that chaos and process some of that experience, like what we talked about before. And then I do work with some people one-on-one, but mainly I do work in nonprofits to help them figure out how to navigate the chaos of this world. And those individuals that are so tied to what they do, their identity is wrapped up in how they serve their communities and to be able
Okay.
to navigate the chaos and prevent the burnout, which is very
And
prevalent.
that's a whole nother discussion, an hour in terms of like your identity is tied up in chaos. But
Absolutely.
we're
Yep.
going to leave it there, that final word. And I just want thank you so much. Thank you for so much for coming on to the About This Life podcast, for coming on this show. It's been quite informative. And here we are changing our lives one day at a time. So I would love my audience to go ahead to listen to this, share it with the people that you love, share it with your friends, your family, and subscribe. Okay. We'll have all of the contact information in the show notes. But thank you, Avery, for being my guest, where it's about this life, changing our lives one day at a time. Woohoo!